Welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk over a few different topics. There's rabbit hole after rabbit hole after rabbit hole, and it's hard to put it all into one video, but I'm going to do my best. So the first one is an update on that Russia document that mentions XRP and Ripple that I asked about in the previous episode yesterday. All of you have come through and delivered that document, so we're going to get into that document. We're also going to talk about a Bank of England speech that happened yesterday. We're also going to look at a couple of Bank of International Settlements documents. One of them is a survey where they ask central banks about their CBDC plans and how many of them are involved. There's a series of questions. We're going to get into that. And the final one is going to touch on some slightly scary topics about how retail CBDCs are going to be used and how there might be a certain period of time that you can use these CBDCs, kind of like China. Roll the intro. Before we get into it, if you enjoy these videos and you like the complexity and the depth of the videos, please consider subscribing to the channel and hit like on your way out. And make sure to comment your biggest crypto and XRP questions in the comments below. So I got sent the Russian document from so many different people. It's going to be hard to thank the amount of people that sent it my way. I'm kind of surprised I didn't find it myself based on how many people actually knew where to find it. The whole point of this document was to explore how different blockchain technologies could be used in their financial system in Russia. And let me remind you why we're here in the first place, right? We're not too interested about Russia. We're only really interested in Russia because of the announcement of this new BRICS kind of currency that's going to be backed by gold. The thought process is that if Russia have tested Ripple or XRP and they liked it, they might be more likely to suggest that as being the underlying technology for that new BRICS coin or that BRICS currency. And overall, actually, this whole document shines a positive light on XRP and Ripple, clearly explains that there is potential in that technology, specifically for cross-border payments. But it did suggest that certain technical and organizational changes might have to happen in order for that to become a viable technology to use. And it's quite easy as you go through that list to make the case to say that XRP can solve all of the problems. But I think overall, when you look at the conclusions and you see that it's XRP and Ripple are positively viewed for cross-border payments, you know, that says enough. If they're positively viewed for that specific thing, then, you know, we're in a good position there. It's also worth mentioning that within that document, they also explain how they've tested many other different protocols and platforms and blockchains. But it was stated, and I'm going to quote here, based on the research results, it was concluded that the Ripple platform can be considered as the basis for starting work on creating a system of cross-border settlements. And I read that to say that XRP and the XRP ledger is the foundation for cross-border settlements. And if Russia view it like that, potentially the rest of BRICS do as well. Especially when you consider how involved Ripple is in India and Brazil. We seem to have all the big players in BRICS, and not to mention Africa. I know South Africa is part of BRICS, but in general Africa, we have 35 countries that want to be using XRP. It kind of just starts to look really good for XRP for cross-border settlements. So thank you for sending me through that document. Let's get into the next one. So we have a speech by Andrew Bailey. This speech was given on the 10th of July. That was yesterday. So let's get into some of the things he says and its implications for crypto, CBDCs, XRP, and I'll give you my honest thoughts as well. So he does touch on crypto assets, and let me read out what he said. Let me move on to crypto assets as another example. These can take two forms currently: what is known as unbacked crypto of the Bitcoin sort, and so-called stablecoins of the Tether and US dollar coin sort. The former have no intrinsic value and are highly volatile and best treated as extremely speculative investments. So you read that and you think, okay, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. And so if you're talking about stablecoins as one distinction, and then like Bitcoin as being basically all the other cryptocurrencies, he's not shining the other cryptocurrencies in very good light, but bear with me. The latter, so we're talking about stablecoins here, while used as the settlement asset for transactions in the crypto world, are not robust and, as currently organized, do not meet the standards we expect of safe money in the financial system. In particular, both fail the basic tests of singleness and settlement finality. They are not money. So he's essentially said every cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin, so that's basically all of them except stablecoins, is not currency. And this is really important what he's just said. The stable coins, he is saying, are not money. And also the opposite side of that, the Bitcoins and all the other tokens, they're highly volatile and can't be used for in any capacity other than speculation. And you might be panicking, you think, oh no, this means XRP. He doesn't think XRP is is a currency or has any utility. But let's get into it a little bit further, because he's leading this speech to kind of this climatic moment where he wants to talk now about enhanced forms of money. And this is what he says. Much more promising, in my view, is the prospect of enhanced forms of digital money which satisfy both tests. And these are the tests of singleness and settlement finality. We need assets, he's saying, in the future that actually settle value with finality. I think enhanced digital is most conveniently defined as a unit of money to which there is capability to attach a lot more executable actions. For instance, contingent actions in so-called smart contracts, which could be simple or quite complex. But the key point of the singleness of money is preserved. It's the utility of money, what we can do with it, that changes, not the money itself. Basically alluding to the fact that blockchain technology, this new wave, this enhanced form of currency, can be used in so many different ways. Now, if he's saying, and it's contradictory because I don't believe he truly understands what's going on, especially the way we do, when he says Bitcoin and such, or and the like, talking about all the other cryptocurrencies, all those other cryptocurrencies include, XRP, XLM, XDC, HBAR, IOTA, Algorand, Quant. It includes all of those that he's saying are basically useless, but he's more than happy to start talking about smart contracts. Little does he know that there are cryptocurrencies that he's deemed as speculation, not utility, underlying that technology, that allows the technology to be used, that he's saying is the best way to go. Enhanced forms of digital money. So the priority here is what you can do with the money, the expanded reach of what you can do with money, rather than the money being that much different than it is today. He also then starts going into central bank digital currencies and stablecoins, and he says this: we may also get proposals to create digital money in the form of stablecoins, which could be issued by banks or non-banks. We will shortly set out proposals for regulating systematic stablecoins under powers contained in the Financial Services and Markets Act of 2023. We know that one. We've been involved. Such stablecoins will have to meet the tests of singleness of money and settlement finality. This is digital settlement tokens, right? We've talked about in that Financial Services and Markets bill that had just gone through Royal Assent and will be ready to go on the digital settlement asset side of things on the 29th of August. And this is essentially the rollout of currencies that the central bank will be using to exchange value. Then he touches on retail CBDCs as well. We are exploring the case for retail central bank digital currency, and we jointly lead a CBDC task force with the Treasury. This is important work, and we're keen to hear views and engage widely throughout the project. The Chancellor and I have been clear that the introduction of a retail CBDC would be a major step, and there would be a public debate about the future of money in the UK. What I've noticed reading these documents is that when the documents are made, when they're written, they are written really essentially without the forethought of what's going to happen. They all talk in such a way where it's like exactly where we are right now. Do you know what I mean? Like there's no, but in the future it will be this, and in the future it will do that, and there may be an adaptation of the way we define these things in the future, and ultimately in that future we'll be able to do all these other different things. They state it very much as like where it is right now, and I think that's a deliberate thing that they do. I think they do that to not cause that FOMO hysteria, because if they give too much information away, it causes a panic in a way where people start speculating on the assets underneath. They already have enough people like me and you doing that. So I really do feel like there's a conscious effort to keep things grounded. They will call it grounded, but very much set on where we are right now, looking down at our feet and saying, where are we right now, without just looking ahead, right? They're not doing the looking ahead part. And I think that's why a lot of the time we look at these speeches and think, do you not know what's happening? Like, why are you not kind of projecting what's going to be happening? We often confuse that with them maybe not knowing so much, or maybe even simplifying it for the general audience. But we know where this is going, and I struggle to believe that they don't. It's just funny how they word these things in these documents so that people don't get ahead of themselves. Next, we're getting into a Bank of International Settlements document that is basically the results of a survey that they conducted. And it in general gives everyone's sentiment and attitude towards central bank digital currencies. Let's go over some of the bigger findings in this document. The one thing that's really interesting is the increased engagement with CBDCs. Let me read it out. Over the course of 2022, the share of central banks engaged in some form of CBDC work rose to 93%. More than half of the central banks are conducting concrete experiments or working on a CBDC pilot. You cannot tell me that CBDCs aren't happening. Okay, there is absolutely nothing you can say to convince me otherwise. 93% of central banks are working on a CBDC. If you don't believe it, I can't help you. Another thing that's really interesting is the short-term issuance of CBDCs. Let me get into this. As work on CBDCs advances, central banks' uncertainty about short-term issuance of a CBDC is fading. A clear divergence has emerged. Compared to last year, some central banks are becoming more likely to issue a retail CBDC within the next 3 years, while others indicated to be less likely to do so. So one of the big things that came up in this is the idea that many of these central banks want to have a retail CBDC out within the next 3 years. And when you compare it to last year, there's quite a difference here. A lot more central banks wanting to do this. So let's put the 3-year thing into the timeline that we have in our heads, right? We're in 2023, 3 years takes us to 2026. Think about what ends at the end of 2025. Yes, the roadmap, the G20 roadmap for cross-border payments. Cross-border payments ends 2025. Retail CBDCs come in. I mean, it makes complete sense. And then, like with all of these things, they try to provide counter arguments to everything. They don't like people to come out of documents too bullish. They like people to be brought back down to reality. Again, everyone look down at your feet. Don't look ahead, don't look behind, just look at your feet. It's kind of like that scene in The Walking Dead where Carol gets the girls to look down at the flowers and look at the flowers before she...
Just look at the flowers.
But they said this: the turbulence in the crypto market in 2022 and beginning of 2023 has shown that crypto assets pose risk when not properly designed and regulated. Continued monitoring will help central banks to identify emerging risks and promptly address such risks. I take that to mean if you're not ISO compliant, if you're not part of that stack of assets that's going to move forward and have actual use and play an actual role in this new system, then you're going to pose a risk to the financial system. If you're not one of those assets and you actually provide something of value, you are regulated, you're properly designed, you're going to be in a considerably better situation. Let me just remind you again, the Financial Services and Markets Bill talks about the regulation of digital settlement assets. That very specific class of assets, settlement assets, is going to be the regulated one. So it's not going to be declined by the Bank of England. It is properly designed because they've tested it and piloted it. The Bank of England have done this, and it will also be regulated, putting XRP, XLM, XDC, HBAR, IOTA, Quant, Algorand in prime position. And the final document, which is the most sensational one, I think, is this one called the Lessons Learnt on CBDCs. This is a whole document talking about, well, the lessons learned about all the documents that have come out, all the tests, all the pilots, all the trials with CBDCs from all the countries, kind of feeding back into the Bank of International Settlements to say, these are our thoughts, these are our worries, these are the things that we're excited about. And part of this document is talking about how these things, how CBDCs need to be interoperable. Now, we've talked about interoperability considerably over the last year or so. I have to say, this particular argument is one that I have not yet considered. How are the CBDCs going to be interoperable? I didn't know there were many other ways, but there are different ways, and we're going to get into all of them and talk about the one that is best suited for XRP. So there are 4 different types of ways that CBDCs can be interoperable. Let's get into the first one. This is the single access point. And I'm going to try and use analogies here and visualizations for everyone to make it easier to understand, but a single access point interoperability system would essentially be like a door that everyone who needs to go into the building has to go through. There's not multiple doors, you can't make it through that way. You can only go through this single access point. Obviously, it's a lot cheaper to do it like that because you don't have to build loads of doors. It's really easy to manage because there's only really one access point and you just have to watch that one point. But then it gets really complicated because if people don't follow the rules and the regulations, like if people start saying they're entering in single file through that door is not the right way to do it, and they start kind of bundling in from the side, it creates a real bottleneck, and that's a real problem. The next one is called a bilateral link. And if we use the same analogy with the building and the door, it's kind of like whoever is outside the building and inside the building, with each particular individual will have their own specific door that they go through to meet each other. And so that's actually really simple. Like if me and a guy called James want to meet, we go to the Lewis and James door. And if James wants to meet with Rob, he goes to the Rob and James door. The problem is, just by the sheer mathematics of this, there are so many different doors that you have to build for every combination of person visiting every combination of person. The big negative side of that is it's really hard to manage, and it will obviously get very confusing. The third one, this one's the most interesting, is the hub and spoke method. And this is essentially like having a central room in that building. So whenever you want to go somewhere, you have to go to that central room and then go to where you're visiting. So you might have a door for every single person, Lewis, James, Rob, but in order to go to visit other people, you've got to go to where their doors are. So you go into this central room and then you go to their doors. I hope you're drawing parallels with XRP and on-demand liquidity there. Then the final one is called a single system. And this is much like the Matrix actually, where you've got one corridor and an endless amount of doors on the side. Everyone walks down that one corridor and you just turn left or turn right into whatever door you want to go to. That's really expensive because that's a long corridor. It'll also get very busy, and coordinating everyone's movements down that corridor would get quite challenging. Imagine everyone's walking down the right-hand side. So if you're walking this way, you walk down the right this side, but you want to go into the door on the left, you've kind of got to cut through traffic to get there. It's a nightmare. And so of course, with all these analogies, we're not talking about doors, we're talking about CBDCs and interacting between CBDCs in these various methods. Now, if we look at the hub and spoke method, which is obviously the one that leans itself best to XRP, you have one CBDC that comes in the building, they go into that waiting room, and the digital pound wants to go to the digital yuan. So it goes to that central room and it goes to the digital yuan. But it uses that central hub, it uses the XRP as that bridge native settlement asset to exchange itself into the other CBDC. So we've really got to keep our eye on this hub and spoke terminology, because if we hear that this model is being used, I'm not overestimating this, if we hear that hub and spoke is a methodology for interoperability that is going to be used for CBDCs, this is money time. I mean, there is no better news that we could possibly receive about CBDCs being XRP holders. But let's get into one more little thing about this document that I found, and it's all the way on page 21, and it's probably one of the more sinister things you can consider in a retail CBDC. Let me read this out. CBDCs that can be used across border bring benefits as well as challenges. The potential of CBDCs to enhance cross-border payments depends on their access configurations. At a retail level, non-resident individuals could be allowed to hold a CBDC issued by another jurisdiction, with access allowed for a limited period, such as a tourist visit or indefinitely. Do you know what this says to me? This says we're using programmable money, which we know Ripple is offering and pushing for the digital pound, for example. But they're saying if you wanted to have your money and you wanted to bring it abroad and you wanted to take it on holiday, the duration of time that your money could exist in that foreign CBDC can be restricted by time. And this might make sense to you if you tell them you're going on holiday for 2 weeks, for example. They might give you the digital euro for 2 weeks, or maybe a few more extra days as a little buffer. But what happens to the assets after that? Are they immediately converted back to your CBDC? Why are we doing that in the first place? Can't I just convert it myself? And it's like this analogy I heard years ago when I was at university, and it was actually referencing sin in terms of like the Christian belief. Your Christian belief or your belief or whatever it is like a tent. One day a lion comes up to your tent and you hear the lion. You say, no, stay away. And you make loud noises and the lion goes away. The next day, the lion comes back, but this time your shouts don't work because you've already shouted, you didn't do anything, you didn't hurt it, so it goes a little bit further. And this time it gets its paw right in the door of the tent. And then you shout again, you go, no, don't go away. And then the lion comes back the next night, and this time it gets its whole leg in before you start shouting. And as time goes on, the lion gets further and further into the tent until you're so comfortable with the lion at this point that you just let it right in. And this is what I see with CBDCs. Yes, we'll control the amount of time that you can use your CBDC when you're on holiday. It can be like vacation mode. And then next year they say, oh, there's a pandemic. Actually, you know this thing that you all thought was brilliant when we limited the amount of time that you could have your digital euro. Well, now, because there's a pandemic and everything and a 15-minute city, if you're outside of your 15-minute city, your money's not going to work anymore. We're going to limit access outside of your radius. And then all the way up to the point where you've got universal basic income and you have ownership of nothing and you're happy with that, and the state give you everything and you're completely dependent. And it's the exact same thing. It also goes on to say, in a wholesale context, non-resident financial institutions could be allowed to hold a wholesale CBDC issued in another jurisdiction, either directly or indirectly. So different rules for the banks than there will be for the retail. Additional approach to facilitating cross-border payments with CBDCs is by ensuring interoperability between CBDC systems, either by facilitating compatibility, interlinking them, or establishing a common platform. And this is what we talked about previously with that hub and spoke thing, as well as the other methods for interoperability. Regardless of the access of interoperability model, cross-border CBDC arrangements need to be designed in such a way that negative spillovers from the macroeconomy and risks to financial stability are limited. One potential concern is that cross-border use of CBDCs could hamper monetary sovereignty by spurring currency substitution, exchange rate volatility, and tax avoidance, especially in countries with weaker economic fundamentals. And so that brings up a few interoperability problems with CBDCs that are arising. And let's get into them. So the first one is access to wholesale CBDCs by foreign payment service providers. So we're going to use a road and a car analogy for this one, because this does get quite complex, and you have to let me know in the comments whether these analogies actually help you in understanding these things. But let's get into access to wholesale CBDCs by foreign payment service providers. So if you imagine a highway with lots of roads, the only cars that can drive down this road are payment service providers. So essentially what you're doing is, regardless of where these payment service providers are from, they're allowed to drive down this highway. And that's fine, that's great, because you can actually get loads of companies using that highway. But it also gets kind of a little bit weird, because some cars drive on the left of the car and some drive on the right. And then there's different rules and different regulations for these different cars, or at least the drivers of those cars. So it can get quite complicated and quite dangerous. And so in reality terms, that's like giving foreign payment service providers access to your CBDC, even if they're not from your country. Kind of can work, but it gets a bit dangerous. Then we've also got access to the retail CBDC by non-residents and the role of payment service providers within that. And this is like allowing visitors to the country to rent a car that goes on the highway. The car itself meets all the regulations and stipulations that system has, but the driver is actually foreign. And this is great because you increase financial inclusion, all the different individuals and payment service providers, but you also have to make sure that the rental company for the car is doing its job properly. Then you've also got the concept of just interoperability of the CBDC system in general. And that's essentially just like having a web or a series of other highways of different CBDCs that can all link to each other. So when one is closed down, you can always kind of reroute or reroute, depending on where you are, to make sure that your car gets to where it needs to go. But of course, there's a lot more tarmac, a lot more roads to build and that, so it's actually can be more expensive to do it like that. But when you talk about interledger protocol and atomic settlement and the way these payments route themselves to the best way to settle that transaction, this one seems like the most likely, and it seems to be the one that's favored in all these documents that I talk about. Then we've got the interoperability of CBDC systems and non-CBDC systems. And before I explain this, I just want to say, we're so far in the weeds here, understanding about actually how the interoperability is going to work, or at least the options that we have for interoperability. And some are clearly rising above others, like the hub and spoke one is clearly the best way to do it, and it aligns perfectly with XRP. And the door and the corridor analogy, it's all fascinating. We're so far in it. And this interoperability of CBDC systems and non-CBDC systems is essentially, in my view, the complete idea of blockchain interoperability in a quantum financial system where you're interoperating everything off blockchain and on blockchain and CBDCs and digital currency and cash. It's all interoperating. Now, of course, that means anyone from anywhere can get on any highway to get to any destination that they want. But of course, the building, the infrastructure to do so is ridiculous. And I actually believe this one, as well as the third one I mentioned, the interoperability of CBDC systems, these two are the other ones that are being pushed forward. We know the amount of effort that's going in, just the sheer amount of documentation, talking about how to interoperate what they're doing with CBDCs. To me, that shows massive infrastructure, and that's why I'm leaning towards those last two. Whew, there we go. Deep dives every day. That's what you get on this channel. If you like the deep dives and you like getting into the nitty-gritty,
let's get down to the nitty-gritty.
Then hit subscribe. And in fact, don't even hit it. Destroy the subscribe button, destroy the like button. If you want to see my interviews with experts in the field, you can click the video below. If you want to see videos that the algorithm think are best for you, click the video up top. You can also click my face to subscribe. Punch my face. Subscribe to the channel. Stay emotionless. I'll see you in the next one.